It was a warm spring afternoon when Jake Winters decided to leave work early. His car was in for maintenance, and instead of waiting for it at the garage, he opted for a ride home with the service technician, Tom. The thought of yard work waiting for him solidified his decision. Jake and his wife, Emily, had a large backyard, and he took pride in maintaining it. As he raked leaves near the back property line, Jake noticed his brother, Adam, pulling into the driveway in his flashy red Mustang. Jake sighed. Adam rarely visited unless he needed something. As Jake approached, he heard his son, Max, call out, "Hey, Dad! What brings you here?" Jake froze. Why did Max call Adam Dad? Jake's heart pounded as he crept closer to the garage, his phone set to record. "Uncle Jake's not home," Max said. "He never gets back before 5, and I avoid spending time with him anyway." Jake's stomach churned. Max had always been close to Adam, but this was different. Something felt off. Adam replied, "I'm just returning Jake's circular saw. I accidentally cut the cord, so he needs to fix it. Is your mom around?" "Yeah, she's inside, but Uncle Jake hardly ever spends time with us. Can I come over to your place again? It's way more fun than being here." Jake's mind raced. Why was Max so eager to leave, and why did Adam act so casual about it? "Sure, kiddo," Adam said. "I'll talk to your mom about you staying with me for a week this summer." "Why doesn't Mom leave Uncle Jake and live with you?" Max asked, his voice filled with confusion. Adam sighed. "Ever since I got your mom pregnant with you, I've been asking her that. She always says Jake is great in bed but wouldn't make a good husband." Jake felt like he'd been punched in the gut. He pressed stop on his phone, his hands shaking. He needed to get to the bottom of this. Later that evening, Jake watched Emily closely during dinner. She seemed nervous, her eyes darting to Max and then back to her plate. After dinner, Jake suggested they watch a movie together. Emily agreed, but her mind seemed elsewhere. As the movie played, Jake's thoughts were a million miles away. He needed proof, something concrete. He remembered they had taken a 23andMe DNA test years ago. What if Emily had tampered with the results? What if Max wasn't his son? Jake waited until Emily went to bed before sneaking into the office. He found the DNA test kit and carefully compared the results. His worst fears were confirmed. Max's DNA didn't match his. Jake's hands shook as he placed the kit back and silently left the room. Jake lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. He felt a mix of anger, betrayal, and sadness. He had to confront Emily, but he needed a plan. The next morning, he called his best friend, Mark, and asked to meet for coffee. At the cafe, Jake explained everything. Mark listened, his expression a mix of shock and concern. "You need proof," Mark said. "Solid proof before you confront her." Jake nodded. "I recorded a conversation between Adam and Max, but I need more." Mark leaned forward. "Set up cameras around the house, record their interactions, gather as much evidence as you can, and, Jake, be careful." Jake spent the next week installing hidden cameras around the house. He placed one in the living room, another in the kitchen, and a third in the master bedroom. He monitored their activities closely, recording every interaction. Emily seemed oblivious, going about her daily routine. She spent more time on her phone, often leaving the room to take calls. Jake's suspicion grew as he noticed her texting frequently. One evening, Emily announced she was going out with friends. Jake feigned indifference but activated the cameras. He watched as she dressed up, a look of excitement on her face that he hadn't seen in years. Hours later, Emily returned home. Jake pretended to be asleep but later reviewed the footage. Emily entered quietly, texting someone as she walked to the bedroom. She stopped in front of the mirror, a small smile playing on her lips. Jake's heart sank. He knew he had enough evidence now. It was time for a confrontation. But he needed to choose the right moment, one that would leave no room for denial or deception. Jake planned the confrontation meticulously. He invited Adam and Max over for a family barbecue that weekend. Emily seemed pleased, thinking it was a gesture to mend fences. On the day of the barbecue, Jake set up the cameras to record everything. As they gathered in the backyard, Jake could feel the tension in the air. He watched as Emily and Adam exchanged glances, unaware of the storm about to hit. After dinner, Jake called everyone to the living room. "I have something to show you all," he said, his voice steady. He played the recordings one after another, revealing the truth. Emily's face went pale. Adam looked stunned, and Max was confused. "Emily," Jake said, his voice filled with hurt. "How long has this been going on?" Emily stammered. "Jake, I can explain." Jake cut her off. "No, Emily, it's over. I know everything. I deserve better." Jake's declaration marked a turning point. The betrayal was out in the open, and there was no turning back. Emily broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. Adam stood in stunned silence, unable to meet Jake's eyes. Max looked at his parents, tears streaming down his face. "Why did you lie to me?" Jake knelt beside his son, hugging him tightly. "We're going to get through this, Max. I promise." The confrontation shattered their family, but it also marked the beginning of a new chapter for Jake. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but he was determined to rebuild his life and protect his son. As the dust settled, Jake felt a sense of relief. The truth was painful, but it was also liberating. He looked at the future with renewed hope, ready to face whatever came next. The following weekend, Jake reluctantly attended a family gathering at his parents' house to celebrate his father, Edward's 70th birthday. Despite the recent turmoil, he knew he needed to maintain appearances until he had a concrete plan. Jake drove Emily and Max to the gathering in Emily's car, keeping the atmosphere light and casual. As they arrived, his mother, Sarah, greeted them warmly. Jake couldn't help but feel a pang of betrayal as he hugged his family, knowing what he knew now. Inside, the house was filled with the usual chatter and laughter. Jake's younger brother Adam was already there, mingling with other relatives. Jake observed him closely, noting the smug expression on his face. Emily seemed nervous, avoiding eye contact with Jake. During dinner, the conversation turned to family history. Edward began reminiscing about the Tyndall family legacy, highlighting their achievements and struggles. "Jake, do you remember when you first learned to ride a bike?" Edward asked, a nostalgic smile on his face. "You were so determined, just like your grandfather." Jake forced a smile, nodding. "Yeah, I remember." Sarah joined in. And Adam was always the adventurous one, climbing trees and getting into trouble. Everyone laughed, but Jake's mind was elsewhere. He decided it was time to drop the first bombshell. "Speaking of family history, I've been thinking a lot about our roots recently." Edward's eyes lit up. "Oh? What brought that on?" Jake took a deep breath. "Well, I did some digging, and I found something interesting. Did you know that I don't look much like anyone in our family?" The room fell silent. Sarah's face turned pale, and Edward looked confused. "What do you mean, Jake?" Jake pulled out the DNA test results from his pocket. "I took a DNA test recently. It turns out I'm not biologically related to you, Dad." Gasps filled the room. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Jake, please, let's not do this here." Jake ignored her plea. "No, Mom. The truth needs to come out. I've always felt different, and now I know why." Edward's face reddened with anger. "What are you talking about, Jake?" Jake held up the results. "According to this test, I'm not your biological son. Mom, you need to tell him the truth." Sarah broke down, sobbing. "I'm so sorry, Edward. It was a long time ago before we got married. I made a mistake, and I've regretted it every day since." Edward stared at her in shock. "You mean to tell me Jake isn't my son?" Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I didn't know until later, and by then I couldn't bear to tell you. I thought it wouldn't matter, that we could be a family regardless." The room was silent, the weight of the revelation hanging heavily in the air. Jake felt a strange mix of emotions, anger, sadness, and a hint of relief. At least now he knew the truth. Jake turned to Emily, his expression hardening. "Emily, it's your turn. How long have you been seeing Adam behind my back?" Emily's eyes widened in fear. "Jake, Jake interrupted her, pulling out his phone. "Don't bother lying, I have proof." He played the recording of Adam and Max's conversation, the one where Adam admitted to being Max's father. Emily's face turned ashen. She looked around the room, seeing the shocked expressions of their family. "Jake, I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen." Jake's voice was cold. "You betrayed me, Emily. For years you've been lying to me, to Max. You've shattered our family." Adam stood up, trying to defend himself. "Jake, calm down. This isn't the place for this." Jake glared at him. "Shut up, Adam. You've been sleeping with my wife and pretending to be my son's father. You've destroyed everything." Edward's voice was firm. "Jake, sit down. We need to discuss this like adults." Jake shook his head. "No, Dad. There's nothing more to discuss. I'm done with all of you." Jake stood up, looking at his family one last time. "I'm leaving. I need to get away from this toxic environment. Max, you're coming with me. We're going to start fresh." Max looked confused and scared, but he nodded, trusting his father. Emily started to protest, but Jake silenced her with a look. "Max deserves to know the truth," Jake said, "and he deserves better than this." As Jake and Max walked out of the house, Jake felt a sense of freedom. The truth was out, and he was finally taking control of his life. Jake and Max drove home in silence. Once they arrived, Jake sat Max down and explained everything. Max listened quietly, tears streaming down his face. "Dad, I don't understand. Why did Mom do this?" Jake hugged him tightly. "I don't know, Max. But we're going to get through this together, I promise." Max nodded, wiping his tears. "Okay, Dad. I trust you." Jake felt a surge of determination. He had a lot of work to do, but for the first time in a long time he felt hopeful. He was ready to rebuild his life and protect his son. That night, Jake made a list of everything he needed to do. He would consult with his lawyer, gather more evidence, and start making arrangements for a new life. He was determined to leave no stone unturned. As he lay in bed, Jake felt a mix of exhaustion and relief. The road ahead would be difficult, but he knew he was on the right path. He closed his eyes, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. In the days following the explosive family gathering, Jake felt a whirlwind of emotions. He was angry, hurt, and determined. He needed to gather more evidence against Emily and Adam to ensure that his plan for revenge would be foolproof. Jake began by reviewing the recordings from the hidden cameras he had installed around the house. He meticulously cataloged each interaction, noting every suspicious behavior and conversation. The footage confirmed his worst fears. Emily and Adam had been carrying on their affair for years, right under his nose. Late one night, Jake called his best friend Mark to update him on the situation. "Mark, I've got everything I need. I've recorded their conversations and I have video proof. I'm ready to move forward." Mark's voice was steady and supportive. "Good. Now you need to consult with a lawyer to ensure everything you're doing is legal and to get advice on the next steps." Jake nodded, even though Mark couldn't see him. "Yeah, I've already scheduled a meeting with a lawyer tomorrow. Thanks for being there for me, man." The next day, Jake met with his lawyer, Lisa Harper. She was a sharp, no-nonsense attorney who specialized in family law and corporate sabotage. Jake explained his situation, showing her the evidence he had gathered. Lisa reviewed everything carefully. "Jake, you have a solid case here. With this evidence, you can file for divorce on grounds of adultery, but you mentioned wanting to take revenge on your brother and the family business as well. Tell me more about that." Jake leaned forward, his eyes filled with determination. "I want to hit them where it hurts the most, their finances and their reputation. I have access to the company's accounts as CFO. I can transfer funds, change security protocols, and shut down operations temporarily. I want to make sure they feel the impact of their betrayal." Lisa nodded thoughtfully. "We need to be careful. Make sure everything you do is legal. We don't want to give them any grounds to countersue you. I'll help you draft a plan that ensures you can execute your revenge without legal repercussions." Over the next few days, Lisa and Jake devised a meticulous plan. Jake began by transferring company funds to a secure account in the Cayman Islands, making sure to leave a trail that would be difficult for anyone to trace. He also changed all security measures, updating passwords and access codes to lock down the company's operations. Jake knew that leaving town would be the final step in his plan. He needed to ensure that he and Max could start fresh without the constant threat of Emily and Adam looming over them. Jake spent hours packing their belongings, carefully sorting through what they needed immediately and what could be left behind. He set aside important documents, clothes, and personal items, loading them into his car. One evening, as he packed, Max entered the room looking worried. "Dad, are we really leaving? What about Mom and everyone else?" Jake knelt down to Max's level, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Max, I know this is hard, but we need to get away from here. We deserve a fresh start, away from all this pain. Do you trust me?" Max nodded slowly. "I trust you, Dad. I just don't understand why this happened." Jake hugged him tightly. "I don't understand it all either, but we're going to be okay, I promise." On the day of their departure, Jake left a series of symbolic messages for Emily and Adam. He placed his wedding ring on the kitchen counter, next to a note that read, "I know everything. Consider this my goodbye." Jake also left a pile of shredded documents in Adam's office, a clear sign that he had uncovered their secrets. He made sure to lock the house securely, leaving nothing behind that could tie him and Max to their old life. With everything in place, Jake and Max got into the car and drove away from the only home they had ever known. As they drove, Jake felt a mix of sadness and relief. He was leaving behind a life filled with betrayal, but he was also stepping into a future filled with hope and new possibilities. Jake and Max settled into a small, cozy apartment in a neighboring town. It was far enough away to avoid any chance encounters with Emily or Adam, but close enough that Jake could keep an eye on the fallout from his actions. Jake enrolled Max in a new school and started looking for a new job. He knew he had the skills and experience to land a position quickly, but he wanted to be cautious and make sure they were truly safe before making any long-term commitments. One evening, while unpacking, Jake received a call from Lisa. "Jake, I've been monitoring the situation at Tyndall Manufacturing. Your actions have caused significant disruptions. Edward and Adam are scrambling to regain control of the company." Jake felt a grim satisfaction. "Good. They deserve every bit of this." Lisa continued. "However, you need to be careful. They might try to retaliate once they figure out what you've done. Make sure you have all your bases covered." As Jake settled into his new life, he received an unexpected call from Sarah, his mother. She sounded anxious and remorseful. "Jake, I'm so sorry for everything. I had no idea this would happen. Please, can we meet and talk?" Jake hesitated. He wasn't sure he was ready to face her, but he knew he needed answers. "Okay, Mom, we can meet, but it has to be on my terms." They arranged to meet at a quiet cafe in town. When Jake arrived, he saw Sarah waiting at a corner table, her face lined with worry. "Jake, I've made so many mistakes," Sarah began, tears welling in her eyes. "I just want to make things right." Jake's expression softened slightly. "Mom, I need to know the truth. Why did you hide this from me?" Sarah took a deep breath. "When I found out I was pregnant, I was scared. I didn't know how to tell Edward. I thought it would ruin everything, so I kept it a secret, hoping it would never come out." Jake shook his head. "You should have told me, Mom. I deserved to know." "I know," Sarah said, her voice breaking, "and I'm so sorry. I understand if you can't forgive me, but please know that I love you and I'm here for you." Jake nodded slowly. "I need time, Mom, but thank you for telling me the truth." As the weeks passed, Jake and Max began to adjust to their new life. Max made new friends at school, and Jake found a job at a local manufacturing company. It wasn't as prestigious as his previous position, but it was a fresh start. One day, while picking Max up from school, Jake ran into an old acquaintance, Julie, who had recently moved to the area. They struck up a conversation, and Jake found himself smiling genuinely for the first time in weeks. Julie noticed. "It's good to see you smiling, Jake. How have you been?" Jake shrugged. "It's been tough, but we're getting by. Starting fresh isn't easy, but it's necessary." Julie nodded, her eyes kind. "If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to ask. We're all here to support you." Jake knew that the ultimate confrontation with Emily and Adam was inevitable. He continued to gather evidence and build his case, ensuring that when the time came, he would be ready. One evening, Jake sat down with Max to talk about their future. "Max, I know this has been hard on you, but I want you to know that we're going to be okay. We have each other, and that's what matters." Max smiled, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "I know, Dad, and I'm glad we're together." Jake hugged his son tightly, feeling a renewed sense of determination. He was ready to face whatever came next, knowing that he had the strength and support to overcome any obstacle. Months had passed since Jake and Max moved to their new town. Jake had settled into his new job, and Max was thriving at his new school. However, the turmoil he had left behind at Tyndall Manufacturing was far from over. Edward and Adam were struggling to keep the company afloat, and tensions were at an all-time high. One afternoon, Jake received an unexpected call from Edward. "Jake, we need to talk. Can you come to the company meeting this Friday?" Jake hesitated, but he knew this could be the perfect opportunity for the final confrontation. "I'll be there," he replied, his voice steady. Friday arrived, and Jake drove back to his old town, his heart pounding with anticipation. He parked a few blocks away from Tyndall Manufacturing and walked to the building, taking deep breaths to steady his nerves. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Employees whispered among themselves, and the air was thick with anxiety. Edward stood at the front of the room, trying to project confidence despite the clear signs of stress on his face. Adam was there too, looking equally tense. Jake entered the room, and all eyes turned to him. He felt a mix of satisfaction and apprehension as he walked to the front and took a seat. "Thank you all for coming," Edward began. "We have some important issues to discuss today, but first I want to address the elephant in the room. Jake, you've caused significant disruptions to this company. We need to resolve this now." Jake stood up, his eyes locked on Edward and Adam. "You're right, Dad. We do need to resolve this, and the truth needs to come out." Jake pulled out a stack of documents and a USB drive. "I have evidence that Adam has been embezzling funds and engaging in unethical behavior. I also have proof of his affair with my wife, Emily, and I have recordings of conversations that reveal the extent of his betrayal." The room fell silent as Jake inserted the USB drive into a laptop and began playing the recordings. Voices filled the room, detailing Adam's deceit and Emily's infidelity. Gasps and whispers spread through the crowd as the truth unfolded. Adam's face turned red with anger and humiliation. "Jake, you have no right to do this." Jake's voice was cold and steady. "I have every right. You betrayed me, and you betrayed this company. It's time everyone knows the truth." Edward looked devastated, his eyes filled with pain. "Jake, why did you do this? Why didn't you come to me first?" Jake shook his head. "Because you wouldn't have believed me. You've always favored Adam, no matter what he did. I needed to take matters into my own hands." As the recordings played, the tension in the room reached a boiling point. Adam lunged at Jake, his fists clenched in rage. "You're going to pay for this, Jake!" Jake was ready. He sidestepped Adam's attack and grabbed his arm, twisting it behind his back. "No, Adam, you're the one who's going to pay." Security personnel rushed in, pulling Adam away and restraining him. Edward looked around the room, trying to regain control of the situation. "Everyone, please calm down. We need to handle this professionally." Jake took a deep breath and faced the employees. "I'm sorry you all had to see this, but it was necessary. This company has been led by corruption and deceit for too long. It's time for a change." With the truth revealed, Jake knew it was time to leave. He turned to Edward, his expression resolute. "I'm done here. Max and I are moving on with our lives. I hope you can find a way to rebuild this company and earn back the trust of your employees." Edward nodded, his eyes filled with regret. "Jake, I wish things had turned out differently. I'm sorry for everything." Jake simply nodded and walked out of the building, feeling a sense of closure. As he drove back to his new town, he felt a weight lift off his shoulders. The showdown was over, and he was finally free to start anew. Back in his new town, Jake focused on rebuilding his life. He dedicated himself to his job and spent quality time with Max. He also started dating Julie, who had become a supportive presence in his life. One evening, as they sat on the porch, Julie turned to Jake with a smile. "You know, Jake, I'm really proud of you. You've been through so much, but you've come out stronger." Jake smiled back, feeling a warmth he hadn't felt in a long time. "Thanks, Julie. I couldn't have done it without you." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset. Jake knew that there were still challenges ahead, but he felt ready to face them with the support of his new friends and his son. Despite the sense of closure, Jake knew deep down that Adam wouldn't let things go easily. His brother was too vindictive to simply accept defeat. And Jake's instincts were proven right when he received a threatening message from Adam one night. "You think you've won, Jake? This isn't over. I will make you pay." Jake showed the message to Lisa, his lawyer. "What do I do about this? I can't let him threaten me or Max." Lisa's expression was serious. "We'll file a restraining order, and I'll make sure the authorities are aware of the situation. Don't worry, Jake. We'll handle this legally." Jake felt a surge of gratitude. "Thank you, Lisa. I just want to protect my son." As the weeks passed, Adam's threats intensified. Jake knew he needed to take decisive action. He decided to meet with Adam one last time to confront him and put an end to the threats. They agreed to meet at a neutral location, a park near their old town. Jake arrived first, his heart pounding with anticipation. When Adam finally appeared, he looked angry and desperate. "Jake, you've ruined everything!" Adam spat. "Why couldn't you just let it go?" Jake stood his ground. "Because you betrayed me, Adam. You destroyed my family and tried to take everything from me. This ends now." Adam sneered. "You think you're so righteous, don't you? But you're no better than me." Jake felt a surge of anger but kept his voice steady. "Maybe I'm not, but at least I'm trying to make things right. Can you say the same?" Adam's expression faltered for a moment, and Jake saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. "You don't understand, Jake. I did what I had to do. It was never about you." Jake shook his head. "It's always been about you, Adam. Your ego, your greed. But it stops here. I'm done with your threats. If you come near me or Max again, I'll make sure you regret it." Adam stared at Jake for a long moment, his face twisted with conflicting emotions. Finally, he seemed to deflate, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "Fine, Jake, you win. But don't think this is the end." Jake watched as Adam walked away, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. He knew that their relationship was beyond repair, but he hoped that Adam would eventually find a way to move on. As Jake drove back home, he felt a sense of peace. He had confronted his past and stood up to his brother. Now, he could focus on building a better future for himself and Max. Life gradually returned to a new normal for Jake and Max. They embraced their new community, forming strong bonds with neighbors and friends. Jake's relationship with Julie blossomed, and they talked about building a future together. One evening, as they gathered for a neighborhood barbecue, Jake looked around at the smiling faces and felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had faced unimaginable challenges, but he had come through stronger and more resilient. Julie noticed his contemplative expression and nudged him playfully. "What are you thinking about?" Jake smiled, wrapping an arm around her. "Just how lucky I am to have you and Max. We've come a long way." Julie leaned in, her eyes sparkling. "And we have so much more to look forward to." As the sun set, casting a warm glow over the gathering, Jake felt a sense of hope and contentment. He knew that there would always be challenges, but with the love and support of those around him, he was ready to face whatever came next. Months after the confrontation, Jake's life had taken on a new rhythm. He had settled into his job at a local manufacturing company, where his expertise was valued and respected. Max had adjusted well to his new school, making friends and excelling in his classes. Jake felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. One evening, Jake and Julie sat on the porch, sipping wine and watching the sunset. "You've done an incredible job, Jake," Julie said, her voice filled with admiration. "Max is thriving, and you seem happier." Jake smiled, feeling the warmth of her words. "Thanks, Julie. It hasn't been easy, but I'm starting to feel like myself again." Julie leaned closer, her eyes twinkling. "I have a surprise for you. How would you feel about taking a weekend trip, just the two of us?" Jake's eyes widened in surprise. "A trip? Where to?" Julie grinned. "It's a secret, but I promise it will be relaxing and fun." Jake felt a surge of excitement. "I'd love that. Let's do it." While Jake was rebuilding his life, Tyndall Manufacturing was crumbling. Edward and Adam struggled to regain control, but the company's financial troubles were too severe. Suppliers had lost trust, and the company faced mounting debts. One afternoon, Edward called a meeting with the remaining board members. His face was lined with stress and regret. "We need to face the facts. The company is on the brink of bankruptcy. We have to consider selling." Adam, looking defeated, nodded. "We don't have any other choice. The damage is done." The decision was made to put Tyndall Manufacturing up for sale. It was a painful choice, but it was the only way to salvage what was left. Jake wasn't aware of the full extent of Tyndall Manufacturing's downfall until he received a call from an old colleague, Steve. "Jake, have you heard? The company is being sold." Jake was silent for a moment, processing the news. "I hadn't heard. What's going on?" Steve explained the situation, and Jake felt a mix of emotions. He had known his actions would cause disruption, but he hadn't anticipated this level of collapse. "Thanks for letting me know, Steve," Jake said, his voice thoughtful. "I hope things work out for you and everyone else." After the call, Jake sat quietly, reflecting on everything that had happened. He knew he had done what was necessary to protect himself and Max, but he couldn't help but feel a twinge of regret for the employees who were caught in the crossfire. The weekend trip with Julie was exactly what Jake needed. They drove to a cozy cabin in the mountains, surrounded by breathtaking views and fresh air. The peaceful setting allowed Jake to relax and enjoy the present moment. One evening, as they sat by the fireplace, Julie looked at Jake with a serious expression. "Jake, there's something I need to tell you." Jake felt a pang of worry. "What is it, Julie?" Julie took a deep breath. "I've been offered a job in another city. It's a great opportunity, but I don't want to leave you and Max." Jake's heart sank. "When would you have to leave?" "Next month," Julie replied, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "But I don't want to go without you." Jake's mind raced. He didn't want to lose Julie, but moving would mean uprooting Max again. "Julie, I care about you a lot, but I need to think about Max. He's just starting to feel settled." Julie nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I understand, Jake. I don't want to make things harder for you." They sat in silence for a while, holding each other tightly. Jake knew he had a difficult decision to make, one that would impact their future. Back home, Jake spent the next few days deep in thought. He talked to Max about the possibility of moving, wanting to gauge his feelings. "Dad, I like it here," Max said. "But if moving means you'll be happy with Julie, I think we should do it." Jake was touched by his son's maturity. "Thanks, Max. That means a lot to me." Jake and Julie discussed the situation further, weighing the pros and cons. In the end, they decided to give the new city a chance. Jake would find a job there, and they would make a fresh start together. The move was challenging, but Jake and Julie were determined to make it work. They found a comfortable house in a welcoming neighborhood, and Jake quickly secured a job at a reputable manufacturing firm. Max adjusted well to his new school, making friends and excelling academically. Jake felt a sense of relief as he saw his son thriving. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Max looked at Jake and Julie with a smile. "I'm glad we moved. It feels like home here." Jake and Julie exchanged a happy glance. "We're glad too, Max," Jake said. "We're building something great together." Months after the move, Jake received an unexpected visitor. It was Sarah, his mother. She looked older and more fragile, but her eyes were filled with love and regret. "Jake, I'm sorry for everything," Sarah said, her voice trembling. I've missed you and Max so much." Jake felt a surge of conflicting emotions. He had kept his distance from his family, but seeing his mother again stirred old feelings. "Mom, it's been a long journey, but I think I'm ready to start healing." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, Jake. I've wanted nothing more than to make things right." They spent the evening talking, sharing stories, and mending their fractured relationship. Jake felt a weight lift off his shoulders, knowing that he could finally move forward with his past reconciled. As the months turned into years, Jake, Julie, and Max built a beautiful life together. They faced challenges, but they faced them as a family, with love and support. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Julie turned to Jake with a smile. "You know, we've come a long way." Jake nodded, feeling a deep sense of contentment. "Yes, we have, and I wouldn't trade it for anything." Max joined them, wrapping an arm around each of them. "We're a team," he said, his voice filled with pride. Jake looked at his family, feeling a profound sense of gratitude. He had faced unimaginable trials, but he had emerged stronger and more resilient. The future was bright, and he was ready to embrace it with open arms. Jake and Julie eventually decided to get married, surrounded by close friends and family. The wedding was a beautiful celebration of their love and resilience, marking the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. Edward and Adam did not attend, but Jake had made peace with that. He knew that not everyone could be part of his new life, and he was content with the family he had built. As they danced under the stars, Julie whispered in Jake's ear, "I'm so happy we found each other." Jake smiled, holding her close. "Me too, Julie, me too." They continued to dance, surrounded by love and happiness, knowing that they had a bright future ahead of them. Jake had found his new beginning, and he was ready to embrace whatever came next. Despite the new life Jake was building, he knew that Adam wouldn't give up easily. His brother's vindictive nature meant he would likely seek revenge. Jake took precautions, filing a restraining order and making sure to stay vigilant. One afternoon, while Jake was at work, he received a frantic call from Max. "Dad, there's a man outside the house. He looks angry and he's yelling your name." Jake's heart raced. "Stay inside, Max. Don't open the door. I'm calling the police." Jake immediately called 911 and then Lisa, his lawyer. "Lisa, Adam's outside my house. I've called the police, but I need to make sure we're legally protected." Lisa's voice was calm and reassuring. "You've done the right thing, Jake. The restraining order will work in your favor. Just stay safe and let the authorities handle it." By the time Jake arrived home, the police were already there, speaking with a furious Adam. The officers quickly intervened, restraining Adam and placing him in the back of a squad car. Jake felt a mixture of relief and anger as he watched his brother being taken away. In the days that followed, Adam was charged with violating the restraining order and harassment. Lisa advised Jake to attend the court hearings to ensure that the legal process proceeded smoothly. The courtroom was tense as Adam faced the judge. His lawyer tried to argue that Adam was simply trying to reconcile with his brother, but the evidence of his threats and violation of the restraining order was overwhelming. The judge looked sternly at Adam. "Mr. Winters, your behavior is unacceptable. You've shown a complete disregard for the law and the safety of your family. You are hereby sentenced to 6 months in jail and ordered to undergo anger management counseling." Jake felt a sense of closure as the gavel fell. He knew that Adam's time in jail wouldn't erase the past, but it would give him and Max some much-needed peace. With Adam in jail, Jake focused on creating a stable and happy life for his family. He continued to excel at his job, earning the respect of his colleagues and superiors. Max thrived in school, participating in various activities and making lasting friendships. One evening, Julie approached Jake with a thoughtful expression. "Jake, I've been thinking. We've come a long way, but I feel like there's something more we can do. How would you feel about starting a community center, a place where families can come for support and resources?" Jake was intrigued. "That's a wonderful idea, Julie. We've been through so much and I'd love to give back to the community." Julie smiled, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. "Great, let's start planning." Jake and Julie threw themselves into the project, rallying support from the community and local businesses. The center offered counseling services, educational programs, and recreational activities for families. It quickly became a beloved hub of support and friendship. Max played a significant role, volunteering his time and energy to help younger kids with their homework and organizing sports events. Jake felt immense pride as he watched his son grow into a compassionate and responsible young man. One day, as they stood in front of the bustling community center, Julie turned to Jake with a smile. "Look at what we've accomplished. We've built something truly special." Jake nodded, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. "We really have, and it's just the beginning." Just as life seemed to be settling into a perfect rhythm, an unexpected visitor arrived at the community center. It was Sarah, looking anxious but determined. "Jake, I need to talk to you." Jake led her to a quiet corner, his heart pounding with apprehension. "What is it, Mom?" Sarah took a deep breath. "There's something you need to know. It's about your father." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I recently found some old letters. They were from a man named Richard, who was stationed overseas. He and I had a brief relationship before I met Edward. Richard is your biological father." Jake was stunned. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" Sarah's voice trembled. "I was ashamed, Jake. I didn't want to disrupt your life any more than it already was, but I realized you deserved to know the truth." Jake sat in silence, absorbing the revelation. "Do you know where Richard is now?" Sarah nodded. "I found his address. He lives in a small town a few hours away." With Julie and Max's support, Jake decided to reach out to Richard. He wrote a heartfelt letter explaining who he was and expressing a desire to meet. A few weeks later, he received a reply. "Dear Jake, I was both surprised and delighted to receive your letter. I've often wondered about you and your mother. I would love to meet and get to know you. Please let me know when you can visit. Sincerely, Richard." Jake felt a mix of excitement and nervousness as he read the letter. He shared it with Julie and Max, who encouraged him to take the next step. "Go meet him, Dad," Max said. "It's important." Julie nodded in agreement. "We'll be here to support you, Jake." Jake arranged to meet Richard at a quiet cafe in Richard's town. As he approached the cafe, he spotted an older man with a kind face sitting at a corner table. Richard stood up, smiling warmly as Jake walked in. "Jake, it's wonderful to meet you," Richard said, extending his hand. Jake shook his hand, feeling a surge of emotion. "It's good to meet you too, Richard." They spent hours talking, sharing stories, and catching up on lost time. Richard told Jake about his life, his career in the military, and his deep regret for not being part of Jake's life sooner. "I always hoped you were doing well," Richard said, his voice filled with sincerity. "I'm so proud of the man you've become." Jake felt a sense of connection and closure. "Thank you, Richard. I'm glad we found each other." With Richard now a part of his life, Jake felt a renewed sense of completeness. He introduced Richard to Julie and Max, and they quickly formed a bond. Richard became an active presence in their lives, offering wisdom and support. One evening, as they all gathered for dinner, Richard looked around the table with a contented smile. "This is what family is about, being there for each other, no matter what." Jake nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. "We're lucky to have found each other." As Jake embraced his new family dynamic, he knew he had to confront the remaining pieces of his past. He reached out to Edward, hoping to mend their fractured relationship. They met at a small park, the tension palpable. Edward looked weary, his face lined with regret. "Jake, I've made so many mistakes. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want to make things right." Jake took a deep breath. "I'm willing to try, Dad, but it's going to take time." Edward nodded, his eyes filled with hope. "Thank you, Jake. That means more than you know." With his past reconciled and his future bright, Jake felt a sense of peace he had never known. He continued to build a loving home with Julie and Max, supported by Richard, and a mending relationship with Edward. One evening, as they all sat around a bonfire, Jake looked at the faces of his family, feeling a profound sense of contentment. He had faced unimaginable challenges and emerged stronger and more resilient. Julie leaned in, whispering in his ear, "We've come a long way, Jake, and the best is yet to come." Jake smiled, holding her close. "Yes, it is." As they watched the flames dance, surrounded by love and happiness, Jake knew that he was ready for whatever the future held. He had found his new beginning, and he was ready to embrace it with open arms.